All right, good evening. Tonight we have Edgar Cayce on This Day Choose Thou. Of the Edgar Cayce on series that we've been doing for a couple of years now, they've all been based on the chapters from A Search for God. Now, many of you are familiar with the Search for God books 1 and 2, and this is the fourth chapter, or the final chapter, as a matter of fact, of the Search for God in book 3. I'm sorry, there are 4 chapters altogether, and book 3 is no longer in print, so I wanted to make sure that you knew, don't try to go find it unless it's on eBay and you're finding a used copy out there. After books 1 and 2 were completed, I think that was around 1942, they went on hiatus because Cayce was so busy giving readings, and then finally gave his last reading in 1944. And it wasn't until after that that Hugh Lane Cayce, Gladys Davis Turner, and Esther Wynn all got together and decided to try to continue on with the Search for God series. So they got as far as 4 chapters. This particular chapter is unusual compared to the other ones because there are no direct Edgar Cayce readings to it. All of the text that comes out of this is just like you're getting in this presentation, and let me bring the disclaimer up here. Just as you are getting John Schroeder's interpretation of the Edgar Cayce readings, or Steve Bobbitt's in the previous things that we've done, what we are getting here is in This Day Choose Thou. It is the interpretation of the people that I mentioned getting together with their knowledge of the readings and dealing with this subject. So there are no direct readings to it, even though you're going to see I'm going to take the text out of that chapter and back it up with some readings to go along with it. So there's a lot of extrapolation, so I want to make sure on this disclaimer you understand we are not speaking for Edgar Cayce, simply my interpretation of the Search for God material out there. So let's get started. I thought in terms of this, there are a couple of things that come up as far as key points, and one of them has to do with what is truth and what is creativity. Those two things are going to go back and forth all over as far as trying to make a decision. So I thought I'd go back to a reading and make sure everybody understands this. This 262-81 means it's a Search for God reading, the 262, and the 81 means it's the 81st reading, and then paragraph 10, and this is the question and answer. And then I go ahead and I add the date there that this is actually done on May 12, 1935. So this, coming from an original Cayce reading, says, what is truth? Now, one of the things that it may be hard for you to see right here, but we have Jesus before Pontius Pilate. And the reason that I pulled that picture out of there is that this actually comes in the rest of the reading without putting the whole text out there. Cayce said, did you know that Jesus was getting ready to answer Pontius Pilate when he asked him that question? And Pontius Pilate says, what is truth? And he walked out and says, I don't condemn this man. And he didn't even listen to Jesus, and he's getting ready to go, but you'd really like to hear the answer here. But nobody waited for it. So, many, many years later, we get to find out what the answer is according to the Edgar Cayce readings. Now, by the way, this being in all caps does not mean that Cayce was yelling, but it does mean that his voice was coming through with a much greater emphasis. This is how Gladys Davis Turner, the stenographer, indicated that instead of, for instance, it would be like, what is truth? That would make us aware of the divine within. It would have been a very staccato, very loud retort as far as answering. So if you're wondering why it comes in all caps like that, it wasn't just me. So that which makes aware of the divine within, each and every activity that is of the mental, the material, the spiritual self. Now, if you're following what this is saying, it says, what is truth? That which makes aware of the divine within. Does it say absolutely everything about this is exactly the way God would say it, pronounce it, phrase it, have it empathically given to you? I mean, when you're looking at this and I read that, I'm going, that's interesting, because that definition implies that the truth exists even where inaccuracies are apparent. How about the Bible? Could we say that about the Bible, to say that is every word in the Bible the infallible word of God, or can the infallible word of God be discerned through the text or verbiage that's in the Bible? I personally think it's the second half, and that, or the latter of those two, and that's what the Cayce readings were talking about as well. So when you think about it, if all it is those parts, if we can discern those parts out of it, which make us aware of the divine within, and the mental, the material, the spiritual self, then we can get the truth out of anything. We can get it out of the major religions, we can get it out of our parents, our teachers, psychics, out of our history, out of our politicians. Maybe not so much there. But you get what I'm talking about. It really is up to us to discern what is the truth in these things. And so the truth is available to us from just about any source out there. That's the important part. If we use discernment, if we find ourselves feeling uplifted, encouraged, motivated, and wanting to help and love and feel better about our neighbor out there, you can bet you're keying in to the truth of a particular thing. So knowing that that is the definition that we're dealing with as we try to figure out I'll go back to the first one, in Choosing Life, Deuteronomy 30 is one of the few Bible verses that Cayce says, read this as if it was written by God to you personally. The other one is John 14 through 17 in the New Testament Gospels. But in this, God personally says to us, I have put life and death before you, this day choose thou. And so that's where this is coming from, where the title comes from on this. I don't know, how many of you have heard of the Aquarian Gospel? Just a couple of you. This is the cover of the latest rendition of it. I actually don't even know if it's being printed anymore. But this is really a book that was channeled by a particular person by the name of, or that's the channel name, Levi, that deals with what happened with Jesus from the time he was 12 until he was 30, and even afterward. But it, in particular, follows him going from Egypt over into Turkey and even into India and all that, and showing what it was that he went through. So in this Aquarian Gospel, I want to come up to the first quote that we have from A Search for God, again, book 3, and this is coming off of page 44 if you're trying to find the reference to the quote here. Remember, there is within, rather, that guidance necessary. So in other words, all of our guidance comes from within. Thou hast named the name. Thou hast within thine experience the greater director, the maker, the creator of the world. So we actually have God within us, is what that next section is saying. And in him there is hope, life, and without him there is little. Doesn't say we're hopeless if we feel like, God's given up on us and all that. It just says there's little hope, if you're trying to block God out of your life, but there's always hope because we are always with God. We can turn our back to him, but God never turns his back on us. So, in looking at this, we understand that the guidance that we need is always available to us from within. So, if we know that we can get all of our answers by turning within, and how do you do that? Through meditation, prayer and meditation, so that you can go ahead and just pose the questions to yourself as far as what it is that you need answers to. And so when you take that into meditation, it takes a while to be able to learn how to do that, but after you do it, believe me, it'll never let you down. So this makes sense when we realize that we've already got all of the knowledge within us. We were created in God's perfect image, which also means we were omniscient when we were first created. So if we understand that, we're not learning anything new, we're simply remembering what wonderful people we truly are. That Marianne Williamson thing that talks about who are you to think that you're so gorgeous, talented, intelligent, wonderful, etc., who are you not to be? Feeling that way and expressing yourself in that way. It's not ego, it's the way God created every single one of us. It doesn't put one of us ahead of the other. We're all about as good as you can possibly get, right? So, if you understand that, then we have to choose to measure up to that which is the best within us. And if we're able to do that, what does that look like? And that's why one of the best examples of this comes from the Aquarian Gospel. In fact, this is after Jesus had started his ministry, and he was approached by some people that said, you're healing, you're allowing the lame to walk, and the withered arm is made whole, and the blind can see, and people can speak again that couldn't. There's a man over here who is a drunkard, and he has a wife and children. If he gets any money, he just spends it on alcohol. And as a matter of fact, he's in his house right now where the family hasn't any food to eat, and he's just drank up, everything, and he's passed out on the bed. Can you go in and heal this man? And of course, I bet everybody is thinking Jesus is going to go in there and maybe do a laying on of hands or rise up or whatever it is. And he didn't do that at all. He goes, wake up, wake up. And the guy's going, he's just in a stupor. So he wakes up, and Jesus doesn't say a word about his drinking. Not one word. He goes, did you hear that last night on the other side of the village there is a tremendous fire and there are lots of families that are now homeless? Now, it doesn't say anything else in there, but apparently this man has some kind of skills as a contractor to be able to organize people and, all the events that it takes to be able to put that together. And he goes, I really need your help. Please come with me and let's go over and take care of this. And he's like, but he still gets up and he goes with Jesus to the other side and literally organizes all the people over there to be able to rebuild all that with a community effort. And by the way, it says that after that he never drank again. Now, why do you think that would happen? And what was so fascinating, he didn't need to have an intervention. He didn't even need to mention anything about the guy's drinking. He was drawing the best out of this individual and saying, let's go help people. That makes all the difference. If you're sitting there feeling like you have to run away from things by drinking, and you're going, no, all of a sudden the next thing the guy knows when he sobers up, he goes, my God, I'm helping all these people. This feels awfully good. Look at this great stuff happening. He didn't need alcohol anymore. He just needed somebody like Jesus to be able to draw attention to what skills he still had within him and give him the opportunity to get there. Will that happen for everybody? I think it happens for Jesus doing it more than maybe it does us, but that doesn't mean that we attempt it any other way. You can be wise as serpents and as harmless as doves, which means, you don't put yourself in harm's way. You don't put the drunk guy in a car and say, go drive over there. But you figure out how to be able to use the talents that they have within them and give them the self-confidence to bring them back together. So in this, we're talking about there was an opportunity for not only Jesus, but for this man to choose. And you can choose life or death. Life being when you're living a life in harmony with the loving ways of God. Death being when you're anything other than that. Even if it's just under, it's a very digital world when it comes to living in perfection and when it's not. And it comes down to, if you're not one with God, keep trying until you are. Not a condemning statement to say if you're not getting there yet, just say keep trying until you get there. Now, a couple of, this first one comes off of the Search for God Book 3, and the second quote is actually coming from a reading so that we can discuss the concept here. Activity. So we're talking about a verb or a movement. Activity is found only in a purposeful life, either for good or for evil. So in other words, you can have this state of being, that you could just be kind of like, you might think God was in the beginning, before the beginning. And he said, there was God. And so he's sitting there and he goes, I am pure love. I have all this potential. I can just think of all of these things that I could do, but I'm still sitting right here. So imagine that before the beginning, this is a representation of God. Now, if you're out there and there's no stars, there's no anything out there, there's just nothing, and God decides to start moving in one direction or another, how does he know he's moving? Unless you've got something to be able to measure or judge that against and have the relative movement one to another, then you really don't know whether God's moved or not. I think this is really representative of what it's like when we're dreaming. How much energy or how much mass is expended on a dream when we have the dream images in there? Now we can start thinking, well, there's electricity with a corporeal brain and the synapses. No. I'm talking about when you are God, before the beginning right here, and you're thinking, we're not talking about electrons. We're not talking about any of the physical universe going on. We're just sitting there in a state of being. And so what happened? Now we go, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. How? The mind of God moved, and matter, form, came into being. So what happened? God started to separate himself. Now, I always like to bring this up, and I won't show you the video on this, just because it starts to make the thing huge. But the best way I can use to describe this is to say, if souls, according to Cayce, have always been and will always be, that means we existed from the beginning. Was there a before the beginning when there was only God? When we think in such linear ways, it's very difficult for us to understand this. But if you think of it as being an embryo that becomes a zygote, and then the zygote divides itself into 2, then 4, 8, 16, 32, and so on. And what happens then when you've got all of these identical cells with a division right there, which one of those is the oldest? That's where I get a real grasp on going, oh my gosh, if we are in the identical, if we're that, I'm just going to stop at 64, but if we're these 64 identical cells, and by the way, those identical cells, before it divided, are still in one great big circle. The great big circle is God, and all of us, the cells within it, are pieces of God. That's why God is always within us. There's no way to separate ourselves from God. We can turn our backs to it, we can ignore it, but it doesn't change the fact that we are indeed, each one of us, a piece of God. And to lose even one cell out of God is unacceptable. 2 Peter 3:9 says God is unwilling to lose any soul. Well, guess what? Same reason you don't want to lose a hand or a foot or any ear or something else. It's a piece of God. He says, am I going to give up on my hand if it's not working? Certainly had enough trouble with my shoulder lately. I'm hanging in there with it. I didn't get rid of it yet. And so you get the point of God moved. He separated himself first in consciousness to create all of the souls, and then in terms of movement, so that there's a physicality to everything. And I would look at this as being like the atoms, the singleness of consciousness of God, big bang out there, and now you have an infinite number of manifested atoms in the physical universe, and that's what we mean by God moved. So what happens when you wind up being able to move like that within the 3 dimensions? I think what happens is, I'm going to go back to this top side or quote up here that says that activity can be for either good or evil. This is something I was fascinated with it because I was so young at the time. I went through basic training, and the sergeants, drill sergeants, kept yelling, "Do something, trainee, even if it's wrong." Because it was just a natural reaction to watch people out there, and they would just freeze. And they wouldn't do anything. And you're going, well, you know what? That really isn't going to get you anywhere. If you just sit there and freeze for eternity, you are not going to get any better. But if you're headed in one direction or another, it's like the car. If you're trying to push a car from a dead stop, and you push it, it takes so much more energy to try to get that thing going. But if you get pushing on it, and then you find out, well, I should be going in the other direction, it's still a whole lot easier to turn that thing around in the other direction if there is motion taking place, if there's activity found. So you can wind up having a situation like Saul, who became Paul. Saul on the road to Damascus, struck down, and the next thing you know, he becomes Paul of Tarsus, who is probably one of the best known early Christians, especially because he was prolific in the number of books that he wrote in the Bible. That only happens because he was out there having a lot of activity, either for good or evil. He was sitting there, taking pot shots at the Christians of the time, and then figured out, I'm headed the wrong way, and he had all that inertia, and he just turned as much of that energy, as much of that motivating, encouraging power as he had in the other direction. So, in this day, if we're going to choose between good and evil, even if we find ourselves headed in the wrong direction, we can make sure that we head in the right direction and fix it very quickly. Don't just do nothing. One of the things that I use in here, in this particular thing, I use a ... 3 asterisks right there to indicate this is still all out of book 3, page 37, but it is not contiguous. In other words, this is one quote up here, and then the second one is a couple of paragraphs below that. So, the average person does not always realize the choices made daily, almost moment by moment, are part of this ever-present responsibility to choose you this day whom you will serve. Only through recognizing himself as a co-creator with God can man begin to sense the importance of his choices. This day choose thou. So when you're looking at this, what I get out of this, these 2 particular quotes has to do with how important do we think every single choice that we make. I had a business partner a long time ago. I was in my early 20s. And his name was Eric. And we would discuss this kind of stuff because he was raised Catholic and it was all very new to him. So he wasn't convinced, but he was interested in talking about it back and forth. And he came up with a concept that to me was just so foreign. He goes, everything I do means something? He goes, don't you think it's just a null event? If I decide to put my foot out there and then bring it back, that draws me closer or further away from God? I'm going, yeah. And he just couldn't wrap his arms around that. He goes, I really believe in the null event. In fact, I believe in a majority of null events. That most everything that we do in a day does not draw us closer to or push us further away from God. You see what I'm getting at there? Now, what does that mean when you take that and say, that is what reality is? What happens? What's the result of that? What it means is that you don't pay a lot of attention to the little things anymore. If you're not paying attention to the little things, suddenly, oh, it's not a big deal that, I gossiped here, or I was thinking bad about the person over there, or I told a little white lie, or cheated on my taxes, made an illegal right turn because I was in a hurry. The slippery slope starts with all the little things that we do. And if you think none of them matter, then the next thing you know, you've really got a bigger problem than you thought. I'll tell you that as I was dwelling on this, and I kind of got this when I was meditating on it, it had to do with, and if the little things don't matter to bring us down, how much faith do we have in taking those line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little, step by step? How much do we think we can turn our lives around with taking the little steps? We would have no confidence in that. We don't have any confidence in the idea that, well, if I just take this step, and then I do the next thing right, and the next thing right, that it's really having the impact that it truly is, that we're actually getting that inertia going, not in the wrong direction, but in the right direction. And if we don't have the faith in the idea that we're having an effect just for those tiny steps that we're able to do right now, then we become discouraged, and we quit, and we don't keep going forward with it. I did like this saying over here. It says, every healthy choice, no matter how big or small, brings us closer to living our best life. So yes, certainly the big choices that we make will have a big difference. You can quit smoking. You can, go ahead and start exercising if you had a sedentary lifestyle and so on. And those would be big. But the small ones would be, okay, I think I'll have a salad today and, instead of the beer. Whatever it comes down to. So in this day choose thou, as it ends up in the quote right here, we understand that the little things make all the difference and that there is no such thing as a null choice. Life is not a dress rehearsal. Do you know, I tried to find out if there was an originator of that one, because I've heard it a lot. And I think I found at least 5 or 6 people that are credited with coming up with this. But, coming from Search for God, Book 3, each moment of our lives is the acceptable time. We're talking about when to make a difference, to turn around and go back to God. Each moment of our lives is the acceptable time. We cannot wait, for in the waiting, we weaken our wills and lose perhaps vital opportunities. We can all think of things that we would like to improve in our lives. And since none of us are just 20-something, I'll bet we've got some things that we kept putting on the back burner for years, decades. In fact, I can think of some things that, I'd like to change in my life, and I'm going, well, I guess I'll get to that next incarnation. You kind of look at it saying, is it reasonable to think that I'm going to be able to change that now? And the thing is that we come into this life with a plan. I mean, there's a plan that says we're supposed to, have these parents, get this education, marry this person, or not married, or whatever happens in these key critical moments of our life that allow us to be able to learn the soul lessons that we came in to deal with. And if we have that plan going and we run into a conflict, if we just say, oh, I'll take care of that next life, how many opportunities are we going to miss? Now, I can tell you that one of the things that I hear over and over again, not just from Cayce, but from other sources, psychic sources as well, is say, when we pass over to the other side, it is not a last judgment, it is a life review, so that we are able to see the entire life that just passed laid out before us, and you get to see it not from your point of view, not from the other person's point of view, but from truth, from how it really was, what the absolute thing. It wasn't any kind of bias to it at all, it's just, this is what it is. So if we're able to see how things unfold like that, then you get a real clear view of what you could learn. And they say, what hurts us the most? It's not that anyone's condemning us ever. What hurts us the most is to see all of the opportunities that we had to be able to make a difference in our lives, to become better people, and we just stood still. Do something even if it's wrong. Get in a direction that's in line with your ideal, with knowing what you're doing the right thing, and then you're headed in the right direction. So the standing still, once again, is a really tough thing in our lives. We have to be, even if we're not going in exactly the right place, we do have to be moving so that we don't miss opportunities. Another one that I do have a reference to is to, anyone know who Terry Cole Whitaker is? She's a female, I guess you'd call her a televangelist because she's been on TV, not anymore, but she's got a church down, I think, in the San Diego area. And I just love her line because she says, this is the life we've been dying to have. It's the only person I've ever seen on TV or one of those ministries that ever talked about reincarnation. And it's probably why she's not on TV anymore. This is the life we've been dying to have. We can, next life, when I have all this money or all these opportunities, or when I'm this much smarter, or I'm better looking, or I have these talents, or no, this is the life we've been dying to have right here. We do not have to wait any longer. This is the time, this is the day. Choose thou what we're going to do with it. So we go ahead and make sure that we start taking action on what we have now. One of the things that occurs to me, a gift that my mother gave Stephanie, my wife, and I, before we got married, was engaged encounter. You may have heard of marriage encounter. They have an engaged encounter as well, in which you, and the format is, and the one that we went to was Catholic, not that we were, but that's just what the background was. And so they have these two couples and a priest. And what would happen is the priest would give you almost a sermon, maybe a 10, 15-minute sermon on a particular subject. It could be on finances, it could be on career, it could be on kids, it could be on sex, it could be on housework, it could be on all of the different things that people can get into conflicts with in their relationships. And it has a number of questions that you're supposed to answer. So you get these notebooks and you fill out your answers to it, and you do that so that you're not talking to each other, and then they ring a bell, and you just switch notebooks without any explanation whatsoever. You just get to see what the other person's answers were to that. And then after your eyes close a little, then you wind up being able to have the discussion and go through all of the things and going, you really mean this? And I can tell you that at least when we went there, at least one of the couples called it off. Not forever, they just postponed the wedding, saying we have a few issues here that we really need to resolve before we get there. Stephanie and I have pulled that out a few times over the years. As a matter of fact, I just did it again. I emailed the questions to her again, and I decathlated. How would you say it?
Catechism?
Decatechism them? I took the Catholic side out of it because, answering questions like, what does your marriage mean to the Catholic Church? It's a short conversation. But start dealing with it, in a practical sense. So I have taken those, and it really is, something to review that. Because even after you've been married, we've been married over 35 years now. And even after all these years, it's great to be able to sit down and look at these same things. And of course, one of the things that's very different, because I wasn't too sure about having children when we were first getting together, neither did she, and I think we both determined in about 10 more years we'll be ready. So, not that that matters. But yeah, you can get clear on some things later on. What is that? See over there to the left, it says, what our lives may look like before we are born. Now, I just made this up Sunday, because on Saturday I saw like a couple of arrows from Peter Woodbury's conference at Unity of Sun City, and I said, oh, this is just a perfect concept to be able to try to say what happens within our lives. So, oh, we've got yo-ho, yo-ho. She tries to keep a low profile, and then she has the Pirates of the Caribbean on her phone.
This one just called me 94, so she's...
She's 94 years old. So she wrote that song. All right, now imagine for a moment that the letter A is our birth, and the letter Z over here with the red circle around it is when we depart this physical body. So we incarnate into the earth at letter A right here. Now, I don't know if you can see those notes down below, but what I wanted to point out is when you come in, you have, just imagine a multiple, infinite number of choices that you can make in there. But if everything goes according to plan, you go like this, and you've accomplished everything that you came in to do if you follow that purple line. You guys with me on what's happening with this? Mm-hmm. Now, let's take a look for a moment and say, we're still little kids being raised, and what would B, C, D, and E be right there? Could that be family combinations growing up? Could it be, you know, let's say that your parents stay together, your parents divorce, you live with mom, you live with dad, you know, whatever the situation is right there, you can see that it would take you to an entirely different part of the tree, according to what one of those early family situations come along right there. Now, once you get there, then you have other choices, and I'm just keeping it as simple as two choices in each one so it doesn't get too out of there. But let's see what kind of combinations we would have from the letters of F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M. So if we're looking at that, that can be things like what level of education. Who do we get? You know how important it is? Who your friends are, who you hang out with, what kind of an effect they have on you. What kind of a career or work do you wind up having? What kind of a spouse or a significant other? What do you choose for recreation? All of those things wind up being the choices that we have right here. Now what happens is, at this point, I'm going to say in our lives, these little lines right here, I'm just showing that you can jump from here down to here, or here to here, or here to here, and so on, that you can go ahead and say, I can still use my free will to make, even though I'm starting to go in this direction, I need to make this jump to have the ideal life. Or you can make some jumps that aren't going to be ideal. One of the things that I put in here are some outs. And if you see the red, remember this is the death over here. If you get to this point and instead of following the path that you intended to, you go here, you're going to be given an opportunity to check out early. You get to go right back and recycle again because you're going, if I keep going in this direction, I'm just not going to get where I wanted to go, except death. So this says, I'm going to check out early here. Or if I make a choice that comes up here, I'm going to check out there. If I make a choice that comes in here, I should check out because I really have accomplished all I'm going to be able to productively do this life because I've already decided what kind of education, friends, work, spouse, recreation, and so on I was going to have back here, so I don't really have the opportunity to get back on the path that I intended. You following me on that? Mm-hmm. And then finally what happens is after we go through and we become mature adults and we've done all of the things that we were talking about here, then you have to say we're now over to V, W, X, and Y. Now what are those particular things? There's really only four things that we come to deal with in this life. You say all of our wealth of experience, all the lessons that we learn take us in a direction that teach us about health, wealth, our relationships, and our spirituality or our relationship to God. We have those four things that we come back into over here. So how are we with all of those things? All right, what do we come in to work on? And so we can do a lot of experience back here, and then we can do a lot of contemplation and absorbing and really locking it in our I wouldn't call it final days. God, I'd like to think I'm going to live a lot longer, but I think I'm here. As far as, you know, I've had lots of life experiences, and now I'm trying to cogitate it all in my mind to be able to make sure I've got it so that I can take that forward with me. And then, once you've got that, that's when you can pass on, have the life review, and work on what you're going to do in your next life. There is no love without sacrifice. Neither is there any choice of a spiritual ideal unless self is lost in Him. Again, this is from the Search for God as opposed to a specific reading. Now, in fact, I'll read the picture. It's not hard to see it. Without sacrifice, we end up letting each other go and giving up on one another. Without sacrifice, we sacrifice love itself. And we end up losing that which matters most in life. Well, what does it mean when it says no love without sacrifice? Do we really think that, what did God sacrifice when He created perfect images of Himself? Did He give anything up? Was God less than He was before? Because that's how we often interpret what the word sacrifice is, that we had to give something up in order to be able to get something else. It's almost like a trade or a barter or negotiation. I think there's a whole different way to look at the word sacrifice when you put it in a context like that. Going back to an engaged encounter again, I remember one of the funnier lines they have. They go, well, a good marriage is one that's fair and just, and that it's a 50-50 proposition, that both people are giving equally to the relationship. But the answer to this is that it's more often 90-10 or 10-90, and that there's the sacrifice in there in which you're the one that's having to make up the difference, or the spouse is the one having to make up the other difference in order to somehow make it feel like it's a 50-50 proposition. To me, that is the sacrifice. You're going out there saying, I'm giving up this comfortable position. Because if I go back to that single green dot in the black right there, there is God going, everything's perfect right now. If I make one free will soul, I'm going to screw the whole thing up, aren't I? Because if I give them free will to go out there and do it, I can already tell everything that's going to happen. God did it anyway. Now, did He do it with regret? Kind of like, they say it happened with Noah and all that God regretted that He made mankind, and He repented He made mankind, so He flooded the earth and started all over again. Of course, I always wonder if it made a difference that Noah, or people that really followed what he said, that Noah was the perfect person to get the earth started again, why didn't Noah and, say, Mother Mary be the two he put in the Garden of Eden? That would have been a much better choice than Adam and Eve, who obviously had the problems they did. But if you got Noah and you got Mother Mary and you put them together in there, first of all, the first kid would have been Jesus instead of Cain. You might have done a whole lot better, So the idea of in sacrifice, are we giving something up, or are we actually making everything better by allowing everything to go a little wacky for a while? By allowing the relationship to be 90-10 or 10-90, to be able to go back and forth, and everybody starts to figure out how to get along well with each other as you do that. So the problem is and this deals with it up here as far as, neither is there any choice of a spiritual ideal unless self is lost in Him. Now, I think a lot of people interpret that to say that when we are perfect and with God, no longer have an identity of self. And the Cayce readings are very clear that that is never, ever going to be the case. In fact, this might even be an exact quote, I've heard it so many times. It says that we will know ourselves to be ourselves, and yet one with a whole. We will know ourselves to be ourselves, and yet one with a whole. Which means we will always understand that we are that individual cell within the big zygote, of cells that's right there. We are the individual cell in there, and yet we are one with a whole. So we're all pretty much identical in terms of what we can do, because we're all omniscient, omnipotent, and by golly, who are we not to be? Since that's the way that we were created. So when you're talking about that, you're going, all right, I am one with the whole, I have my individuality, and there is no way that you're going to lose that. So what does it mean that if you need to lose yourself in Him? It's everything else that we have picked up along the way. The Japanese have a really interesting way of talking about how do you make the perfect statue. Well, you start with this big piece of marble and you take away everything that doesn't look like the perfect statue. I think that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about sacrificing self. You're taking away this irregular piece of marble, I'll say marble, that we have become right now, and we keep taking away the pieces that are not part of the perfection that we were creating originally from God. And so what we are losing are all those pieces of ourselves that we have brought that have made us to where we have added on additional baggage or luggage that we don't really need in order to be part of God's perfect ways. This is over 2 pages on the search for God. To be one with Christ is the manner of relationship all men must ultimately set as an ideal. The tools used for the attainment are study, prayer, meditation, and application. These are the mediums through which we become aware of the Christ force that lies deep within each of us. To me, it's those 4 things that it talks about right here, where it says study, prayer, meditation, and application. Those 4 things are just absolutely critical to us being able to not just stand still, not just do, try to get by and not be noticed as we go through it. Even if we do something wrong, do something. We go out there, we study something, we pray and meditate on it to stay in balance, and we apply it out there when we are interacting with everybody else. Now, you love it. I really like this picture. I don't know if you can see it that well, but you have a woman meditating on the end of the bed, and she's got her 4 kids just raising hell behind her there. I really see meditation, especially if you're first starting, feels exactly like this. It's like the phone rings, the doorbell rings, you got it, your alarm goes off, and you've got your agenda for the day that you have to take care of. Oh, I'm running out of time. Oh, I got to get a meal started, do the laundry, whatever it is. It's very difficult to get to this centered place when you have all this cacophony of everything going on around you. So knowing that that's that different, does that mean that we shouldn't try it? So, no, you really just have to make a concerted effort in order to make sure that you can put that time aside. Now, it's very easy for me because I don't work anymore. My wife goes off to work, and so my dogs will settle down, and who calls me? I don't work now. So it's gotten an awful lot easier, and it is for us in our later years to be able to, put yourself aside in order to be able to do that. But it's very difficult to get to the study and the application. That's why you will see me so often say, what else do we have to do that's a better use of our time than being a part of something like the Cayce groups that we have here at Unity of Phoenix and all over the valley, as far as being able to deal with study, prayer, meditation, and application. Because what happens, it's really the time where not only do you get to be able to do all these things for yourself, because we pray and meditate in those, but we also are studying the Search for God material, and we're constantly talking about the application of it. When's the last time you saw me give a talk where I didn't talk application mainly? I go, here's the point, now here's 10 minutes of application. I mean, I am so in to making sure that we see how this lofty concept over here actually works when the rubber meets the road out there. And so it's so important to me that I feel like the Search for God or being part of the Edgar Cayce group is just the best way to be able to do that. I'll tell you, one of the things that I think happens is that when we leave it to ourselves, or if you feel isolated, that no one else in your family is interested in this, or you can't find any friends that will support you on it, and so you start doing it on your own, I think you can only get so far. It is so true that we get into heaven leaning on the arm of someone we've helped. And that's not just someone singular, it's someone plural. I mean, everybody helps us, we help everybody as we lift or float all the boats at the same time. So this is a very important concept, and I think Cayce developed these Search for God books in order for everybody to be able to work that way. Because one of the things that I know in my own life, when I sit there and say, how do I become Christ-like, I don't care how much I am sitting there reading all this stuff and thinking about it and understanding the right way to do things. If somebody goes into the Garden of Gethsemane, grabs me, starts beating me mercilessly, putting a crown of thorns on my head, humiliating me out there, causing me to carry my own cross up to Mount Calvary, and then nailing me to the thing, I'm not going to say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I just can't get there if I'm left to my own devices. Apparently we are able to do that because Jesus said, the things you see me do, you will do and greater. So I mean, as tough as that one was, we're supposed to be able to do that and things even greater than that. Pretty amazing. Pretty darn amazing to think that. But I think we don't do that on our own. I think we do it by working with each other. Because what you wind up doing is meaning that, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. If you can say that and mean it instead of just have the words come out of your mouth, then it's not just, I forgive you, you SOB. You know, that's about as far as I can get right now. But I think it really does make the difference. This is a fascinating one to me as far as an application of this day choose thou. How many people have heard of this gentleman on the right? His name was Burton K. Wheeler, and he was a United States Senator back around just prior to World War II. Burton K. Wheeler, Senator out of Montana. You might have even heard of this person over here, is Cornelius, the one kneeling down. This is Peter, Simon Peter, and this is Cornelius of Caesarea, who was a Roman soldier who converted to Christianity. Simon Peter converted him. And so that's what that depiction is right there. The one kneeling down being converted is him, according to the Edgar Cayce readings. Now, that top one, this is what we can look at as far as what's available. This is where the dates become very important. We have this 1938. Here's the question of the 10th paragraph. Does it look probable that 1848, that's actually Burton Wheeler, 1151 is an associate of his, does it look probable that Burton Wheeler will be the next president of the United States? This is in 1938, and the election will take place in 1940 in that particular cycle. It's very probable that Burton Wheeler will be the next president if he chooses to accept. Now, we're going to go to an interesting thing down here in March 25th, 1939. Apparently, 1151, what was his name? Oh, I got it down here. Milton Harrison. Milton Harrison is this 1151. This psychic thinks that you're going to be the next president of the United States if you choose to do so. And so he goes and gets one, and I mean only one reading. This guy had like 40-something. He gets one reading, and there's his question. It's not just one question, but that's the most relevant one to this example. Is there a destiny consistent with the nation's destiny that I be the next president? Answer, unless there be one, such as this entity, meaning him, arising to direct not only the ship of state, but the destiny of the peoples of this land, turmoils and strifes must increase. So it's saying not only could he be president should he choose to, he needs to be president or something really bad is going to happen. Does anyone know anything really bad that happened after 1939? Oh yeah. All right. So when you're looking at this, and if you go back and you look at 1151, you can see from an associate point of view what was happening is they were trying. He's saying, okay, I'll start giving it a shot, and they put together the team that was going to get him elected president. You know, you have all your chief of staff and all of the minions that work together with you to do that. And you could tell from the readings that these were the people that killed him. This was the right guy to be president, but he couldn't get the people to work in cooperation around him. And finally he said, I don't want to be president anymore. If I can't get this group of people to work together in peace and harmony to get me the right person elected so I can go out there and do all this good, then I'm not going to do it. And all the people that were together who felt like this is the guy we want to do were not willing to let go of who and what they stood for in order to let that happen. How would you feel if you get to that life review and you realize my stubbornness, my desire to make sure that things went according to the way I wanted them to do, put us into World War II. World War II was already going on by this time, by the way. We just weren't in it yet. All right, they'd already gone into Poland, I believe, by that time, or were about to. So that it really is a problem. Now, one of the things that was interesting, and the reason I bring up the previous life of Cornelius the Caesarean, is that this Milton Harrison up here said that he was one of the right-hand people of this Burton Miller back when he was Cornelius. And said, that is what you need to draw on. That's what you need to go back and you find out when you were together at that time, all of the people that were together were with you, and you were working together in cooperation. You're going to be in a lot of trouble if you don't draw back to that time when you managed to put this together, and how important it was at that time in order to get it to happen. So Cayce was making it clear that this is what you needed to do, use that as the model, and yet who's heard of Burton K. Wheeler today? The man that should have been president. It's just amazing that there was so much infighting to stop that. So right here, again, I'm starting with a Search for God quote in book 3, and then I back it up with a reading to be able to talk about the same thing. Even when the time of war has passed, men will continue to enjoy excitement of argument, contention, fear, and hate in the daily patterns of their lives. Well, as sad as that is, I think it's true. Now let's go and see what the readings say directly that causes a statement like that to get made. Back in, and by the way, this is in World War II now. We're talking about May 30th, so it's been going on for, what, 6 months? December 7th of 41 to 5/30/42. So, based on present conditions, will the forces, being, whoever Cayce's dealing with over there, advise us when the fighting will stop? Answer: this is dependent upon many things. It could be over, it is possible for it to be over by the 30th of September. That's 1942. Anyone remember when it ended? They had May for Germany, and VE Day in May, and then it was August for VJ Day, 1945. All right, so, but this would require a united effort on the part of those who pray more than those who shoot. And they are not ready for it yet. This to me is just, this is like being on the other side of that life review and seeing what opportunities were available to us and we passed. We sat there immobile. We weren't moving in a particular direction, except that we weren't going to turn it around at that point. We were enjoying ourselves too much. We were excited with our argument, contention, fear, and hate in our daily lives. We were just absolutely convinced that that's what we wanted to do, and we needed to just kill each other until we could figure that out. So at this point, 9 months there and a month before, so 10 months, so within 10 months, the war could have been over from the time that it started, if everybody who prayed was more of a critical mass than those who wanted to shoot. I like the way how simply he put that. There's people who pray and those who shoot. But when I look at this, I'm going, okay, World War II has been over for quite a while now, 73 years. So if you have 73 years of no more World War II, not that we've had peace since that point, I thought about, okay, so what does it take to be able to have peace in the Middle East? And it occurs to me it's the same answer. As much as everybody is all ticked off over about the things in the Middle East, I think those people at some level are enjoying being victims, enjoying being ticked off at the other side like that, and it causes excitement through their arguments, their contention, their fear, and their hate in the daily patterns of their lives. And so until they are able to get a critical mass of people who are willing to pray as opposed to those who want to shoot, I don't think you're going to get over the 1,000 years, or get over the thousands of years of violence that they've had over there. So is there no hope for all of this? Now, I'm sure most of you have seen this video, the next video that I have here before, but to me, this is one of the most uplifting things that I can imagine, because what happens here is it shows you, even though things appear to be a certain way, you can make amazing, almost miraculous things occur. What you're getting ready to see here is this regular distilled water in that bottle right there is going to be frozen. And frozen not just to 32 degrees centigrade, or I'm sorry, Fahrenheit, or 0 centigrade, it's going to be frozen down to, I want to say, 11 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 11 degrees Fahrenheit. And they're going to take it out of the freezer, and it's still going to be a liquid. And then they're going to go bonk on that, and you're going to watch that water absolutely within seconds turn into a solid chunk of ice. What are we talking about? To me, this is the water of life right here. We are so close to being able to bring it into 3 dimensions as a solid. What we need is some kind of a catalyst in order to do that. We have the water, the container, we have the cold, we have the, all of these conditions are ready to go, but it needs a catalyst. I'm thinking at some point, something's going to happen where everybody's going to go, enough. This is enough. We're not going to do this anymore. So let me go ahead and show you the, I've got to hit a play button on the computer here. But what you're going to do is see a number of different ways in the way this manifests. So there it is. Got a number of bottles going in because they're going to use all those bottles before the video's up. So at not quite 3 hours. And you saw it was minus 11 degrees Fahrenheit. See, it's obviously still a liquid. Pulls that thing out. Watch. We just watched the spirit is the life turn into the physical, being the result within seconds there under the right conditions. If you already have the critical mass set there, and you pray, you add that spiritual energy, and you can grow things at an incredible rate. It's ice just like you're used to. In fact, he's going to take a bite, I think. Yeah. Showing you what it is. So there's that very cold water being put into the glass, and then you just drop a little ice cube in it, and it's just like a little bit of yeast leavens the whole when you're able to do that. Another example, just doing it with blue water, it's a little easier to see it that way. Pretty amazing stuff. So I think we're actually very, very close to being able to actually see peace in the Middle East if we can get to that catalyst. Now, the catalyst could be something really horrific. I don't doubt that that could happen. Doesn't have to be. That, again, is our choice of how we're going to do it. It can just be by a lot of people praying. Again, from page 38, Search for God, book 3. And the choice is to be made by self-good, and by self, good and life representing creative forces, evil and death representing selfish motives, selfish desires, lack of incentive for relative influences. So what we're talking about in making the choices, on our own, we have the free will, and we can choose life and death as far as that goes, or good and life representing the creative forces. Now you remember me at the very beginning was talking about this is a resounding concept in here in terms of creativity. In fact, Cayce always talked about, he didn't even talk about love as much as he talked about the creative forces in life. And I mean, it's not that God isn't love, it's that love can be a verb of action, it can also be a state of being. Very difficult to wind up thinking of creative forces as not being a verb. You think of creative forces and you're just thinking of a flower budding, spring exploding all over the place with just beauty all over the earth as it does. So one of the things that this is indicating right here is that when we're talking about making good choices in our lives, we wind up exciting or encouraging the creative forces within us. And what happens when we start going down the path of evil and death representing the selfish motives, desires, and we're really going to come away with a lack of incentive for anything, now we're starting to see we no longer have access to creative forces. In fact, we're not very creative at all. How many drunks do you know that are creative about it? I'm going to go to the same bar and I'm going to have the same drink, and you know what? They're probably still telling the same jokes every week too. So that it doesn't wind up getting a whole lot better than that. So when you're looking at this, you're saying from a biblical standpoint. I made this point in the beginning that life means that we are making decisions that are in accord with the loving ways of God. And then when we're talking about if you're doing anything other than that, and it's talking about evil or death representing, but it's always selfish motives, selfish desires that are going to take us away from being creative. So the most important part of this is to understand we are cutting ourselves off from the creative forces or even the creativity within ourselves whenever we wind up making a selfish choice. What happens then? We become depressed. And when we become depressed, we lose our creative juices. We don't even see a creative way to be able to pick ourselves up and get us out of where we are. There really is a critical mass to these things. We'll put ourselves in real desperate straits, so we'll say, remember my little decision tree right there? It said, I'm going to get to this point in which I am really in sad straits. Am I going to make the right choice to be able to go in the direction that says, I am going to, open myself up to God's loving ways to manifest those in my life, or am I going to go in a direction that cuts me off from creativity and makes me depressed? And at that point, you can guess what happens from there. It doesn't really go that well. One of the things that fascinated me has to do with the studies that talk about people who feel creative, that they are manifesting their creativity in life through their job, at home, with their families, and their recreation, and that sort of thing. And they have found that if there was one thing that talks about how to measure success in a person's life, it's how creative they feel like they're being. And that doesn't matter whether you work or not. I mean, you don't have to have a job out there, even be retired like many of us are, and say, okay, I'm not out there in the real working world right now, but I can still be creative. I can still do an Edgar Cayce on, series of lectures out here. I can go ahead and volunteer to be able to help out at the Arizona Humane Society or whatever does it for you. And so you can manifest that creativity and be of service to other people no matter where you are in life. And it says that the better balanced people in life are those that are satisfied with the level of creativity that they're able to express. So we come to, I'm actually going to cover about 18 points, but that's the end of the talk too. This comes down to an article, in fact I have the link down here, it came from the Huffington Post, that talked about what is a creative person, what are the telltale characteristics and behaviors of highly creative people. So if I go through these 18 points right here, go ahead and see how well you fit in with the things that are here and see which ones were. It's not that you have to have all 18 of them in order to be a creative individual. It's just showing what typically creative types do. The first one there, I'm sure I probably have to read this, but most of you, I know if at home on YouTube, you have the slide up in front of them, so it's a lot easier. They daydream. So a creative person daydreams. And thus it says daydreaming involves the same brain processes associated with imagination and creativity. So in other words, if you're daydreaming, you're just thinking, what if? Now, that could be what if I won the lottery? Or said, what if I went out there and started doing this volunteer effort? What if I started writing a book? What if, like we were talking about with Mary, taking that book and turning it into a movie? So that these are the types of daydreams that are out there, but at the same time, what's happening is it's causing your brain processes to be able to stimulate imagination and creativity. This is not difficult to understand, that it's like a muscle. Imagination and creativity become stronger, become better when we use them. If we don't use them and we're depressed and we don't try to be creative, the next thing you know, that's a vicious cycle in the wrong direction. As you start to use imagination and creativity, you wind up using them more and more and finding yourself being able to take greater and greater advantage of that. The next one, they observe everything, which means they see possibilities everywhere and are constantly taking in information that becomes fodder for creative expression. One of the lines I like quite a bit is that creativity is the ability to hide your source. So that you think of creative people, I said, how many times have you seen like a movie or a plot twist or something in a book that came from something else? You know, oh, I remember when another story, did that particular thing. Or it could be a style of painting or something like that. So if you're observing everything, then all you do is stand on it. Now, of course, if you're a scientist, that's called research. And you're standing on the shoulders of giants in order to make your great discovery. Mm-hmm. It's called plagiarism if you do it as an artist. All right, so you're able to go ahead and say, I'm going to take all these experiences and all these things that I've seen out there, and I'm going to use them as fodder to be able to get my own creative expression going with that. The next one, they worked the hours that worked for them. I've noticed that I had done this most of my life, that I didn't really do things in the same schedule that most people, tended to follow like that. So individuals with high creative output will often figure out what time it is that their minds start firing up and structure their days accordingly. And by the way, for me, it really doesn't say I have to be at the same time or in the same place doing something like that. I do tend to have the same conditions. I know I sometimes would sit down to write and I'm going, this is not a good time. Don't, if you ever say that to yourself, just get up right then and don't try to write. It's just, wad it all up out of the typewriter and throw it in the trash can. I know everybody here knows what I mean with that. Kids will look at me and go, what? What does that mean to pull the paper out of the typewriter and throw it in the trash? I have no idea what this is. It says, they take time for solitude. It's hard to find that inner creative voice if you're not getting in touch with yourself and reflecting on yourself. What's funny is after I retired and I spent so much time at home, and that was when I really started writing books. And my wife was still working, and so, I remember she would work from home one day a week. I remember I'd be, in the kitchen or my office, and she'd go walking by, go, wow, oh my God, somebody's here with me. And I just wasn't used to it. I got so used to having the solitude, and that was back when I was writing the book. And very often I'm kind of in a meditative state right there, so when somebody comes in, you're not expecting it, it really does kind of throw you off. The next one, they turn life's obstacles around, usually by putting their faith in God or love rather than themselves. How many people do you think, well, and Job is the exception in the Bible, in which you wind up taking this man of God and just putting him through hell, and he still winds up having perfect faith in God. By the way, Edgar Cayce says that one of the incarnations of Jesus in the past had been Enoch, and Enoch is the one who is associated with writing the book of Job. So it's interesting to make that connection through there. But so you take that, and that's as good as it gets. But how many people do you know that were born with a silver spoon in their mouth, and the next thing you know, if the stock market takes a dump or they get fired from their job or whatever the occasion is, that they had built their confidence up because they have those things working in their life, suddenly that's taken away, then it makes it a lot more difficult to say, I am motivated to be able to turn this around. Well, creative types are usually able to turn it around because they put their faith in something other than their own accomplishments or the things of the earth. Then we have, they seek out new experiences. Creative people love to expose themselves to new experiences, sensations, and states of mind. And this openness is a significant predictor of creative output. I almost never want to, when Stephanie and I talk about where we're going to travel next, I don't want to go to anywhere I've been before. Going, why would I do that? And yet I hear, oh, we go back to Hawaii. No.
Some people do go back to
over
Hawaii.
and over and over again. I'm going,
Yeah.
I went a couple of times. It was great. I loved it. Now I'm going somewhere else. So it really winds up being as this says, that they're seeking out new experiences. Very often we can wind up getting in a trap where we. In fact, that's one thing when you start thinking about buying a vacation home or getting a timeshare and condominium, where you keep going back to the same place over and over again. And I've never been. That's never been my way. So I'm glad to be able to share that one if I'm trying to be a creative type. They fail, that's not fall, they fail up. Resilience is practically a prerequisite for creative success. Learn not to take failure so personally. As a matter of fact, that was a real advantage for me growing up in being raised with the Cayce readings, by my parents. And that is that I never saw the things that a lot of people would think of as failures. Oh, I could say, yeah, that really didn't go well, and blame myself for a lot of the reasons why it didn't go well. However, I always looked at it as this was an opportunity for me to learn, for me to grow, for me to be able to not make the same mistakes the next time that I am faced with that. And so I think this is what they're talking about when it says they fail up, because you don't wind up taking the failure personally to say, since that happened back then, it's always going to happen that way in the future. The past does not equal the future, ever, because we are destined to be perfect in omniscience, omnipresence, and omnipotence, because that was the way we were created from God. The next one, they ask the big questions. Creative people are insatiably curious. They generally opt to live the examined life. And I remember that from Walden in saying that the unexamined life is not worth living. All right, so they opt to live the examined life. And even as they get older, maintain a sense of curiosity about life. You almost see that with, at least I have, with a lot of people that have gotten, in their 80s and beyond, they're going, well, what the heck new is going to happen to me now? In fact, I remember my father, he died at 65. I remember I said, I've seen everything twice anyway. And he was thinking at that, I realized I'm very close to what the age my father died at, and he was already talking like, I've just been around and I've seen everything. Because, of course, back then, I guess people died a lot younger. But it was to live the examined life and to be able, as I said, in a study group, to be able to go in there and study it, to be able to pray and meditate about it, and then to go out and try to apply it in your life and be able to see how to tweak all of that and make it better. That's part of asking the big questions. The next one, they people watch. Observant by nature and curious about the lives of others, creative types often love to people watch, and they may generate some of their best ideas from it. Before I really started to do what I'm doing now, and that has to do with doing the Edgar Cayce-ons, writing the books that I have, I spent years, and my wife would just shake her head at me, I spent years being online in what are called chat rooms or message boards, going back and forth with atheists, with people of all the religions, whether they were an evangelical Christian or as I said, Muslim, atheist, Jews. I just have these, I didn't need it to be a debate, but it was hard to get away from that, the way those rooms or message boards were structured. And I would spend years and hours trying to understand what motivated people. And it's hard to sit there and point to this or that, as being the crux of what would change or help me to understand other people. But I really put some time in the trenches to be able to understand other folks in order to be able to do just what it was talking about here. That was an interesting way for me to people watch, but it did help me to generate some of my best ideas from it. And actually got me to the point where in the book that I wrote, Let Not Your Heart Be Troubled, was largely inspirational writing, as opposed to just sitting down and writing like an author does. I would go into a meditative state, ask myself the questions, and start writing out what I saw as the answers. The next one, they take risks. Creativity is the act of making something from nothing. It requires making public those bets first placed by imagination. This is not a job for the timid. Well, first of all, I've been self-employed just about my whole life. You can't do that and be timid. You just have trouble trying to make all that happen. Especially when not all, I think I had like 7 different businesses over that time, or careers if you want to call them that. Not all of them were successful. Some of them were really successful, some of them were not. And were really disasters at a time I would have preferred they didn't go down. But it is what it is. So, in terms of you take risks, and one thing, I've never felt that it's been a risk for people to know what I believe. I don't really hide what I believe. All of my friends, secular friends that I have out there, if they get to know me, they know that I'm into all this kooky stuff. And that, I actually believe that there was a psychic that said something that I would think of listening to. And basing, my life's decisions on the kind of worldview that come out of the Edgar Cayce readings. I believe in reincarnation and so on. And it's a risk to put that out there, and yet I don't think I've really lost very many friends of it. It's taken decades for some of them to ask me questions about it. But as long as they see that I'm not going to jump on them and become evangelical about something, it makes it safe to be able to do it. Next one, they view all of life as an opportunity for self-expression. Creativity is nothing more than an individual expression of your needs, desires, and uniqueness. And if you go ahead and you look at it like that, that it is an opportunity to be able to express yourself. First of all, what is implied in there? You have to feel good about what's inside. If you do not feel good about what's inside, why would you have any desire for self-expression whatsoever? So there's a lot packed into that one particular thing right there to understand if your needs, desires, and uniqueness really upsets you, then you have a real problem with that particular one. And the last one on this slide is they follow their true passions. Creative people tend to be intrinsically motivated, meaning they are motivated to act from some internal desire rather than a desire for external reward or recognition. I have to say I have the perfect role model for this growing up. My mother was a volunteer for the Edgar Cayce organization, the ARE, Association for Research and Enlightenment, for more than 40 years and never made a penny. She was a full-time, more than 40-hour-a-week volunteer doing this work, and I grew up thinking that that's what people did. You know, it never even occurred to me to think that I would go out there and volunteer my time and try to figure out how to get paid for it. I also can say that a lot of the self-employment things that I wound up being the most successful in, I wound up just going into it because I had a passion for it, because I had an interest in it. And it allowed all those creative juices to flow that wound up making it successful in many cases, but I was not looking at it from the idea of, you know how much money I'm going to be able to put in my pocket if this thing works out? I was looking at it from the point of view, this is really cool, and this will be very entertaining, or this is going to help a lot of people out. And you start with that, and you keep going with it, you know that now you're doing it from an internal desire to be able to be of service than a desire for external reward and recognition. Have just a few more, and that'll be it. They get out of their own heads. It allows you, being a creative person, it allows you to imagine your future self. But it also allows you to imagine what someone else is thinking. You know, I remember that line that says that it is a real gift to be able to see ourselves as others see us. Have you ever tried to do that if you were ever having a conflict with a person and all of a sudden you leave your body there and you go stand up against the wall with your bag of popcorn and you just watch the show taking place there in front of you as you watch the whole thing manifest? And so if you're able to get out of your own head, I can tell you that I see a couple of things right there on which I've been able to go ahead and say, what is it? And this is kind of my marketing background. That's what I wound up with an MBA in marketing. The best line I ever heard from that is figure out what the person's objections are to whatever it is you're trying to promote, and then answer all those objections, and the next thing you know, you've won them over. Now, that could mean you sold them something, that could mean you wanted a date, that could mean that, you know, you get to go out on a date with them. I don't know however you want to manifest that. But you wind up having the whole idea of meeting all the objections of whatever person that you're talking to right there. So for me, I've always looked at it from the idea of what is somebody else thinking, and for myself in making decisions for myself, I'm always trying to go, if I do this, what am I going to look like in the future if I keep thinking and acting this way? Next one, they lose track of time. They get in the flow, and the flow here is capitalized. Flow is a mental state when an individual transcends consciousness or conscious thought to reach a heightened state of effortless concentration and calmness. I do this to my poor wife all the time. I try to meet her for lunch every day when she's at work as often as I can. Sometimes I have to text her and say, I did it again. I'm too late. I was writing, I was this, I was that. And I can't go over there and pick you up can you meet me someplace for lunch or whatever, so that, yes, I lose track of time, but if you get in the flow, it's really easy to do that, and it's all for the right reasons, that you are in a heightened state of effortless concentration and calmness. Next one, they surround themselves with beauty. Creative types exhibit a high sensitivity and responsiveness to artistic beauty. I have to say I married into this. This was not one of my strengths at all, but I have a much greater appreciation for the beauty that is around me for being married to a creative type, that this comes very naturally to it. As she points it out, and she goes, look at that. And I'm going, Oh, yeah, wow, that's pretty cool. Whereas, you know, up until then, I was pretty much going like this and not seeing a thing, right? So in some cases, you wind up being able to better yourself by the people that you surround yourself with. The next one, they connect the dots. If there's one thing that distinguishes highly creative people from others, it's the ability to see possibilities where others don't. Or in other words, vision. I want to go back to Senator Burton. Apparently Senator Burton, if you remember that slide a while back, had said if he chooses to, he could be the next president of the United States. And so Senator Burton was apparently somebody, if you take the implication of what was coming out of the readings, who not only had the leadership skills, but he actually was going to lead people in a direction that was sustainable, through peace, through being able to cooperate as opposed to, you know, go out there and negotiate or try to compromise. Remember, compromise is where nobody gets what they want. Cooperation is where everybody gets what they want. Because if you're all going to the same goal and you all get to those goals, then everybody got what they want. And in compromise, you're going, well, I'm going to give up all these things that I hate to give up in order to get these, and then they're having the same feeling and nobody's happy. So if you're connecting the dots, and you're a highly creative person and able to see the possibilities where others don't, then you're able to be that Burton who in and of himself would have been a great president, but the people couldn't come together to create the supportive structure to be able to get him there. Next one, they constantly shake things up. Creatives like to shake things up, experience new things, and avoid anything that makes life more monotonous or mundane. Luckily, I married a woman who has gone with me on a number of these things. We often reflect and laugh on the fact that we had lived in California pretty much all of our adult lives up to that point. I said I wound up being in between self-employment things. I had one company that was going public, and once they did, that would have been, you know, put me out of the job. And that was fine, that was what I was there to do. And so I went home and seeing that we had accomplished our goal, I said, why don't we move to Phoenix? I don't think it was a 5 or 10 minute conversation before we moved to Phoenix. It was not, have we ever discussed that before? I don't even think we have we?
That you liked Phoenix.
That's as far as it went. Because I did like Phoenix. I was going, I can just see where California, that's looking into the future. I can see where California is going. Every year, this is getting worse. I hate being stuck in traffic, and it was just driving me nuts. And so, believe me, if you think you have traffic jams out here, don't go to California. And so I'm constant, and so then we move out here. The day after we move, we've got nothing but furniture strewn all over. We're living out of boxes, and I looked at Stephanie and I said, let's go get a dog. Oh yeah, well, I have stories about that too. But yeah, I definitely wanted to, you know, much to her chagrin, been one who's constantly shaking things up. And finally, they make time for mindfulness. Many artists, entrepreneurs, writers, and other creative workers have turned to meditation as a tool for tapping into the most creative state of mind. I always like to, especially with this, I reordered it so it ended with that. Because I can't stress enough, especially with that picture you saw with the lady on the end of the bed meditating with all the kids messing around behind. In the day-to-day cacophony that we go through with all the distractions, you know, I think we get to the end of our life and go, I could have done so much better this incarnation if I didn't have all those distractions. You're like, wait a minute, isn't that what you came down here for? The distractions are the things that we're trying to be able to learn how to do a better job of choosing our way through when they come up. So the distractions are definitely the point of why we're here instead of the thing that's keeping us away from it. And that is as much as I have to say in the time allotted for this day Tuesday. Any questions out there? Very good.
I do have the